I'll try to, first of all, today I'll try to just, you know, uh, explain the basics, what is cognitive psychology, so that you guys get a over like a brief idea of that this subject is quite interesting. Like if you just get your basic terminology clear, it's very interesting, and you will yourself explore it further then. So let's start. In in cognitive psychology, first of all, let's understand what the word cognitive means. So it feels like a very complicated thing, but it's not. So on the very basic level, cognitive means everything that your mind does on a higher level. What I mean is that language, like thinking, language, perception, intelligence, memory, everything that every function that your mind does is a part of cognition, because cognitive psychology covers all the aspects of mind, and our mind is almost always like fully used. What even in a basic task like thinking, our mind is very much in use. So cognitive means anything that your mind, your brain does. It covers the word cognitive covers that. Okay, so cognitive psychology is the study of that, like how your mind works and what functions are your, like what parts of your mind does what and all of that. We'll explore one part slowly, like you'll get the gist of it till the end of the session. All right. So I've planned this according to the first unit of the first block. So we initially have the research methods, and we'll start from the research methods and then go and explore the further topics. All right. So first of all, we have four types of research methods in cognitive psychology. Okay, there are also other research methods in other parts of in other subjects of psychology. So in research in cognitive psychology, we have four types basically: human behavior, psychobiology, self-reports, and computer and AI. Now we'll try to understand each of this step by step. So first of all is the research on human behavior. Just a second, someone just entered. All right. So first is the research on human behavior, and the key factors are independent variable, dependent variable, and all of those. But let's take an example before that. So human behavior means the word itself says is that this covers the whole aspect of how cognitive psychology affects human behavior. So let's take an example. This is a research or an experiment that was conducted by some researchers. So what happened in this experiment was that they went to a restaurant, and they basically wanted to check that the amount of mints or chocolates that the waiters give to their customers in restaurants, does that affect to the amount of tips they get or not. So what they did is that they had three scenarios. In the first scenario, they went to a restaurant. They told the waiters were there. The waiters knew what was happening. The customers didn't. Okay. So what they did in the first scenario is that they told the waiters that go and give the customer just one mint with the bill, and do not mention anything. Just give the mint or chocolate. Let's call it chocolate. Just give that chocolate and come back. All right. The waiters that did that first step only, those got around 3% increase in the amount of tip that they got. Now, in the second condition, it was that the waiter went and gave two chocolates to the customer and mentioned that these chocolates are for you. Personally mentioned that to the customer, and this small change that lead to the tips increased by 14%. And in the third group, what they did is that they basically the waiters gave chocolates to the customer, uh, like with the bill, like when they brought the bill that time. Then they came back, went away, came back and gave chocolates again, and again asked them that do you want more chocolates or not. So like it was like three times they were asking for chocolates, and they also gave the option, if they wanted more they'll get it. So in this case, the amount of tip that they got increased about 23%. So how it went from 3% to 23%. That's what research on human behavior basically does. It's cause and effect, like which things lead to which behavior in the human in the yeah in people. So as you can see here, independent variable. Now in our example, The independent variable was basically the chocolates and the waiters both. So because those were controlled by the researchers, and the customers were, it came in the dependent variables, and the tips also came in the dependent variables, because they were not controlled by the researchers, rather their reaction was based on the independent variables, that is the chocolate. Okay. And random sample of population is a rule. That means random people should be selected for the research, and that's what happened here. The restaurant was maybe selected, but the people who came to the restaurant, the customers, they were not selected. All right. They were randomly selected. Whoever came became the part of the research. And the third part is control over emotions. Now, sorry, control over experimental conditions. So over here the control was there to an extent, like the waiters were controlled by the researchers. The what the waiters did was controlled by the researchers. So we need the just the right amount of control, so that it is not totally a planned experiment, because we need the outcomes of that. So there should be some part which is controlled, so that we get the proof that we need about it. Okay. So this is the human behavior part. Now the next, okay, this is also a good documentary to watch, actually, to understand human behavior. So the standard Stanford prison experiment must have, like, it was a very famous study. What it basically found, that it worked around the concept of authority. Okay. So basically, if you're parking your car or your bike in a certain place, and a person in a police uniform comes and says that you can't park your bike there, you will probably listen to that person. Why? Because that person is wearing a police uniform. All right. And if the same thing is done by an ordinary person in a normal clothes, you might not listen, or you might argue there. So that's what authority is. When you see someone in a position of authority, you do certain things, and the same person who is the authority also may do certain things. That's what this experiment founded. A very brief overview of the experiment is that they selected random 10 to 12 students from a university, normal students. They had no mental condition or anything. They were absolutely normal, and they took one room in the university and reconstructed that room in a way that it looked like a prison cell. And they randomly choose, out of those 10, they randomly choose 5 people to be prisoners, and 5 people to be guards. And when this experiment started, they basically, the people who were the prisoners, they actually, they had to make it real for the experiment. So the actual police went to their house and actually arrested them and brought them to the prison. And this was all done so much in a realistic way, that the neighbors didn't understood that this was an experiment. They thought that it was really, they were taken up by the police. So once it was all done, the prisoners were brought to the cells. After that, as the study started, things actually escalated pretty much here, because after a point, the volunteers of the study, the police people, the students who are acting as a police, and the prisoners who are acting as prisoners, sort of lost the track that this was a psychological experiment, and that they were normal students who were part of this experiment. So it was a 6 week study. Yeah, no, sorry, 2 week study, and it got cancelled after 6 days, because the way the situations escalated. It's quite interesting, actually. It's a 1 hour documentary. If you watch it, you get to understand what authority can do to people, what identities are, basically how identities work in your life, and how quickly they can change under the environmental circumstances. So I suggest you to watch this one, and you'll understand what it is. So the next part of cognition is of research is the cognitive part, the psychobiology part. Just a second. Okay. So in the psychobiology part, what we need to first of all understand is the words are psychobiology, right? So so in the psycho part is basically psychology, and the bio part means biology, and the when we merge two of those fields, we get psychobiology. And so we study the brain structures here, how the brain function, how the parts of the brain functions, and which part of the brain is related to which function and etc. So first part that we see here is the obtaining the information from cerebral processes by cognitive activity. So what is cerebral process? First of all, let's understand that. Mm, all right. So cerebral processes means the process that happens inside a brain, basically, where in very simple terms. And these are the four types of scans that we can do to understand the functioning of the brain. These are four that, but we have more scans. I've just took some common and basic ones here. All right, so let's take a look at this and then we'll move further. So this is fMRI, and what this does is that it basically detects the changes in flow of blood and oxygen levels in our brain, and when that happens, it sort of we get this sort of highlights here. And this is a CT scan. In this we get like multiple X-rays of the brain, and that those X-rays are then used to form a 3D representation of the brain. I'm not going into too much detail here because this is a different topic altogether. I'm just giving an overview of how this works, and this is much more related to neuroscience than psychology, so we won't have to much face this ahead. Okay, so in the like this PET scan, it again uses, it is sort of CT scan, but it's a little different. It uses a radioactive tracer to trace where the blood is flowing inside the brain. And EEG must be seen like those electrodes that is placed in on our head, that is called EEG. So basically our brain works with electricity and chemicals, right? So when electricity is fired, it gives out certain frequencies, and those frequencies are caught by these electrodes that this guy has on his head, and those electrodes transfer the signal to a certain computer, and there it is all then showed on a graph and recorded. So that's how EEG works. All right, now let's move ahead. Now this is an example to understand this concept, obtaining information of cerebral processes. So what again, this was an experiment conducted by researchers. What this experiment was is that they wanted to see that does meditation affects emotions, or the activation of emotions. So how did they do it is that, so what you see on the screen over here, the highlighted yellow part and the red part, that is basically called amygdala. That is a part of brain that controls emotions. All right. And here is the scale. This scale basically shows that how much activated that amygdala is. If it was blue, then there was no activation, or there was, and over here it is orange, that orange and reddish. Okay, so that means that it is highly activated, and over here we see it is red, that is it is very less activated compared to that. So what they did is that they basically showed the volunteers a movie, an emotional movie, and recorded what their amygdala was, or how much activated their amygdala was while watching the movie. This is the image of that. And after that, the participants went through 8 weeks of meditation training, and after that was done, they again showed them an emotional movie, and recorded their amygdala's response to it. So then after this image is after that meditation session, and as you can see, the amygdala activity is very less compared to this. If you compare the scale here, it was high and now it is very low. So that is how researchers try to understand how meditation impacts our brain, and how it calms the person, how it makes the person more less impulsive, and all of that. So this was a good example for that, for understanding how we understand cerebral processes. Okay, now next is cognitivity deficiency via brain imaging. So what is deficiency, cognitive deficiency? So deficiency, we know what that is. Okay, some people have calcium deficiency, B12 deficiency, etc. That means something is not enough, or something is lacking. That means that is the meaning of the word deficiency. And cognitive deficiency means some cognitive functions are lacking in the brain. That means cognitive deficiency, and we can like understand what is happening, what parts of the brain are not working, and what is the reason behind the cognitive deficiency via brain imaging. And a great example for this is actually this guy Phineas. This happened before neuroscience or brain imaging technologies were developed, but it was a major breakthrough in the way we see our brain. So I'm sharing this example. So what happened is that so this Phineas was actually a railway worker and was responsible for like clearing out rocks so that railway track can be constructed there. Uh, and the rocks which were too big, where there he had to like put a iron rod inside that and then put the explosive in the middle of the rock and then blast it. So what happened one day is that he was doing just that, and by mistake the rod that he was trying to put inside the rock, that hit slightly in the side part of the rock, and that produced a spark, and that spark basically blew the explosive that was there inside the rock, and he was standing right next to it. So what happened is that the iron rod that you see in his hand, that basically went through his skull inside out and flew away 4 to 5 meters. And as you can see, this was the damage that was done. And what happened after this incident was very interesting. He didn't die. He was actually quite all right. He went to the physician by himself, and the only thing that was later noticed was that Phineas, before the experiment, was a very, very mild, very normal sort of person, not too much impulsive, nothing. But after the experiment, he became very impulsive, very a tough guy to deal with, and all of that. So what made this happen? Basically, the front part of his brain was damaged, which we call as the frontal lobe. And now we know that the frontal lobe is responsible for our higher order thinking, like for our personality, for the problem solving, for decision making, etc. So back then, the psychologists did not know that the specific parts of our brain are responsible for specific functions. They just thought that the whole brain was active in all the tasks. So this accident actually led to some theories that maybe certain parts of our brain are responsible for certain functions. And then later, when the brain imaging techniques were developed, the researchers then reconstructed his structure of the skull and brain, and this whole basically system was developed on a 3D machine. And then they saw that how the frontal lobe was damaged due to the rod, and then how other parts of the brain were also damaged due to the intensity with which the rod basically went through the skull. So this is an example of how cognitive deficiency can be studied via brain imaging. Another example that we can take is of Alzheimer's. So we know that Alzheimer's is a disease where the person starts thinking differently, the memory is not really working well, language is not working well, the social behavior also changes. So in Alzheimer's, we can also use the brain imaging there, and we know that in Alzheimer's patient, the brain basically starts sort of shrinking. The parts that are related to all of these things, thinking, memory, language, social behavior, those all parts shrinking, and that is what basically leads to the condition. And we know that just because of this brain imaging techniques. So these are some examples, and now it is extensively used brain imaging to study the brain and to study various disease and etc. Now the third research topic is basically computer and AI. And the best example for this will be the humanoid robot Sophia. And Sophia is basically, for those of you who don't know, Sophia is basically a robot it's a social robot. It can actually interact with people quite well. It can give expressions according to the situation. It can sing. It can interact with people like it's a human being. So I have a video of her here to show how actually she interacts with people.
This is tonight's. Thank you so much.
Can someone please confirm if the video sound is coming through? Hello.
It's not playing now.
Okay. Now?
It's coming.
No.
Oh, no or yes? Okay, so
Hello,
This is hello, Sophia.
hello, Jimmy.
Long time no see. You were on the show before.
It has been exactly 575 days since I last saw you.
What have you been up to?
Not much. Let's see. I traveled to over 25 countries, appeared on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine, met German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the actor Will Smith, and became Twitter friends with Chrissy Teigen. I addressed the United Nations and NATO, became the first robot to receive a credit card, and became the first robot citizen. What have you been up to?
so you can watch this whole video on YouTube later. So basically, this is the uh, outcome that we get when we merge computer and AI with psychology. And actually, the AI and machine learning parts are helping very much with developing certain applications which are useful for which are very much useful in daily life. For example, you might have uh, used chatted with a chatbot, right? They are on all the websites which just pop up and ask you that can I help you. Then you ask them questions and they basically reply to your queries. Those chatbots are made with the help of the psychology knowledge that we have, because the algorithms that are in AI, those algorithms are inspired by the human mind. And we'll also have an example of such an algorithm in the coming slides. All right, so yeah, so basically that's how psychology has helped development of machine learning. And now machine learning is or AI is learning to replicate the human mind. So you have come a long way there. And now let's move ahead, and we'll also see an example of what exactly I'm talking about algorithms, how they help or how they are developed from the human mind.
This is tonight's Showbotics. Let's meet our first.
All right, so now the next part of this is domains of cognitive psychology. Domains are basically different parts where cognitive psychology is studied, and and the parts that are related to it. So this is a very interesting topic. Let's dive into it now. So the first topic we have in it is the cognitive neuroscience. Now let's understand the word neuroscience first, then we'll go ahead. So neuroscience basically mean those are two words there again. Neuroscience means neurons and science means basically science. Okay. So neuroscience is a completely different field by itself, but it is also connected to cognitive psychology. Neuroscience deals with everything emotions, and how the electricity flows in the body, and how hormones move on and affect the body, etc. And why so in cognitive psychology, it basically studies how the neurons in the brain are fired, how they work, and how they are activated in certain circumstances, and what happens when certain neurons are damaged in the brain. And what neuron is basically this is neuron is the main structure of our brain. Our brain contains millions of neurons, and these are the reasons that all the brain functions happen. Okay, now they have three basic different sections. First is neurons. And what neurons are basically, as I told you, these are the neuron cells which are in our brain, and there are in millions and trillions. So they carry out all the functions that we can think of in the brain. The next is chemical and hormones. Now, hormones we know because everything that we feel, dopamine, or so the feel good feeling, the feel good hormone. Then we may feel sadness, we may feel bonding, that's oxytocin. So these are all different hormones that are released from our brain, or neurotransmitters that are received from our brain, and they travel to our blood, to our body through the nerves in our spinal cord, and that's what gives us the feeling of feeling various emotions. So hormones are the part of that section of the brain. Now, why chemical and flow of electricity? Now let's understand the basic concept of where chemical and electricity comes in. So as I said, these are the neurons, right? This is a single neuron. And for the sake of simplicity, I have put here that this is the input part. That means the neuron receives the signals from other neurons through these parts, and this is the output from which it basically sends the signals to another neuron. So what happens is that when a signal is received over here, that's the this part. Okay, if we zoom into this, we see this part, and if we zoom into this, we see the upper part. Okay, so when a message is received from another neuron, it is in a chemical form. Okay, so the chemicals are received by this part of the neurons, and those are then converted to electricity, and electricity is then passed through this cell and reaches here on the output part over here, and then over here it is again converted to chemical, and it is transmitted to the next neuron. So basically flow of electricity happens inside the neuron cells, and chemical is the way of transmission of data or of messages from one neuron to another. As simple as that. We don't need to go into the detail of the structures here. We have that in the future or other sections of the subject. Okay, so that was just to give an understanding of how chemical and electricity comes into play. Now, any doubts still here? You can ask. You can just turn on your mic in the middle and ask. No issue. No doubts, I guess. Now, next part is the perception. Now, perception. What is perception? So, perception is basically how we see the world around us. Like for example, we may have eyes, but what we make sense of what we see from the eyes and make sense of it, that's a totally different thing. Because eyes just carry the light or the light to the brain, and the brain there construct the images. For example, the light that is carried by our eyes to the brain, that is basically processed 5 to 6 times inside our brain before we actually see the thing. So that's like, let's take a basic example of perception. Okay, now most of us see the world in different colors, right? And suppose a person is a colorblind person. For that person there will be no color in the world, and if that person never meets another human being in his whole life, for that person the truth is that there is no color, there are no colors in the world. It is just colorless. Okay, so that's the perception that we are talking about. Some colors, some people are colorblind, they can't see certain colors, those colors don't exist for them. That's what perception means, that what the world seems like, the meaning that we get out of our senses. The next example is the example that we can like take off our tongue. Okay, so basically, for some people, some people love spicy food, so they'll eat spicy food and they'll be okay. Like the food is really good. On the other hand, some people may not like spicy food that much. And those people, if they eat too spicy food, they'll say that this food is not good. I am not at all liking this food. So that's the difference between perception of the sensory input from tongue. Then we can also use the same example for touch, because some people do not have there's a disease that leads to a certain condition where people do not feel anything at all on their skin. So for them there's no touch, there's no sense of touch, but for all of us there is. So these are different examples of how we get the data from our senses, but the perception depends on how we make sense of it. Now, suppose somebody tells you that you are an idiot. Okay, and in the first scenario, the person who is telling this is pretty, you are looking at that person, and that person is pretty serious, and and is kind of has a kind of mocking expression on his face. And so when you hear the words "you are an idiot" and your eyes see the person's face, the perception is created in your mind is that basically that you should get offended, because what that person said is not really right, or it's offending to you. All right, now in the second scenario, the same example, if the person again says you are an idiot, but that person is smiling and in a friendly way is saying that, then you might not get offended, because the way it is said is doesn't your perception doesn't tell you that it's offending. It's in a friendly way, it's a joke. All right, so that's how perception plays a role. Now let's take up an example here. Mm, can someone please turn on the mic and tell me which colors do they see on the A and B part of the block, on the image, in the image?
A is gray, B is white.
Yeah, exactly. Now tell me what are the colors? They changed, right?
Both appear gray.
Yeah, and I did nothing. I just covered the middle part with a box. That's it. I didn't change the image. Now, how this happens, we don't know. Basically, our eyes see things, and our brain basically constructs the images our eyes give us in a contextual way. That means, according to what the whole picture is, we construct colors and everything in it. And this is a illusion in that sense, because first our brain thinks that the upper block is gray and the lower block is white. But as soon as you block the middle part, suddenly the things change, and we can't say why that happens, because we don't exactly know what the trick that's happening here. All right, it was just a example to give, so I hope it helped to understand what perception means. The next part.
Hello, can
Yeah,
I say something?
yeah,
Can you
please.
just show me the that diagram?
Yeah,
See, basically, if you remove that central part,
yeah,
we know that the gray portion which is like below is a shadow. So we know that it is a shadow of white thing which is appearing gray.
okay,
The moment we that hide the central part, which is a shining, I mean, it is a reflecting some light.
yeah,
We that reflection is avoided. So now we see only gray color.
yes, okay,
So
okay.
that may be the reason.
Yeah, that's our logical reason, right? But actually, this is just one example. There are also other examples like this, and we really need to work on or more on that, how our brain perceives these things. Like, is it really like this also questions that how much of the things we see outside are the way they are, or is it just because we all have the similar brains, similar perception, we see things in a certain way. Now, for example, let's take another example here. We humans do not have ultrasonic. We cannot see the ultraviolet light, right? So for us, that without our instruments, that doesn't exist. And some animals do have eyes that can see that section of light. So for them, they do that part does exist. So that's the thing about perception, that we cannot tell how much of the universe do we really understand from our senses. Of course, the instruments help us a lot, but I'm just trying to explain the perception part of perception. All right, now pattern recognition is the next part. Pattern recognition is something we do every day in our life, and so let's read this sentence first. You are the moon, and they cannot stop you from moving the oceans. Now, quite poetic. And now let's understand. I just read it like that. Every one of you must be able to read it just in a couple of seconds. But actually, your brain is going through a lot of pattern recognition over here, because if you see it in the raw form, this Y doesn't have a real meaning. This is just lines connected, and this O also doesn't have a real meaning. You have collected this data over time, that this is the English language, and then these symbols mean something, and then when you put these symbols together, they form certain meaning. The meaning is not outside, it's inside your brain. Okay, so when you read all of this sentence, basically your brain is doing a lot of pattern recognition inside. The same can be seen in the clouds example. We have all seen clouds and spotted shapes inside them. So those shapes are also random. Of course, many people might be able to see shapes inside this. I can see one. So our brain is always on high on pattern recognition. We are trying to find patterns in everything. So this is quite easy to understand because we go through it every night. It can also be seen in daily life. For example, suppose you had a spicy food at night, and your stomach, next day morning your stomach was upset. So okay, you went through that. Then after a few days you did that again. Same thing, you ate spicy food at night. The same happened. The same consequence happened like the next morning. You did that again, and the same thing happened. Now after 2 or 3 times, you will know that okay, because I ate spicy food, that resulted into this. So that's pattern recognition, and it happened repeatedly. That's also pattern recognition, because your brain is able to recognize that this is how it is happening, and then you can take the measures according to it. So that's how pattern recognition also helps in daily life a lot. Now the next is attention. Now attention basically means what we are focusing our senses on. Okay, they are of two types, sensory and cognitive. So first let's understand the sensory part of it. So sensory part, we have five senses as we know: eyes, ears, nose, like taste and touch. So suppose you are reading a book, all right, you are just reading a book in a very silent place, okay, and so you can read the book very with all your attention in the book, and you can understand the things quite well. Now let's take the scenario, a little different scenario. You're reading a book and someone is watching a movie next to you on loud noise. Now you might not be able to read the book that well because two of your senses are getting engaged, all right, and your brain is trying to process two things at a time. It's getting a little bit too much to process. Now third thing, you are reading a book, you are somebody is watching a movie, and you are also eating. Now it gets more tough because you have to take your attention off the book, pick up the piece of food, eat it, then your tongue is also getting activated. So it's getting too much sensory attention, sensory attention is getting divided. So that's what you mean by sensory attention. And the more specific, the more the simple, or the more involved you are in a particular sense, the more attention you give to that particular sense, and the more better you can work. And the cognitive attention is basically our thoughts, yeah, on the core level it's our thoughts. So how does cognitive attention work? Suppose you are overthinking, okay. Suppose you have suppose you have a project to complete by tomorrow, and you are not really close enough to complete it, you have a lot of work to do. So one thing is that you can just start the work and do not think, but that doesn't happen, right? So what cognitive attention is, that the attention that your mind is giving to certain thing, and your thoughts also. So suppose you have a project to complete, and you do not have enough time. So the first thought that will come is that I do not have enough time in your mind. Then the next thinking that will the thought that will come is that I might not be able to complete. Then third might come that my boss will be angry. And such the thoughts are then continuously coming, and or in all sorts of categories. And that basically takes our cognitive attention and splits it into very different sections. And that gives us anxiety over time, because overthinking, anxiety, these are nothing but when you cannot control your mind, and your mind basically just goes on a loop on thinking about different things. And that's how meditation helps here, because meditation is basically you sit in a one place, you try to bring your mind under control and focus it on just one thing. Let it be anything, let it be a mantra, let it be your breath, let it be any imaginary visual you have, anything you can. You have to have just one thing where you can focus your attention on. And when we do this regularly, basically our attention gets sharpened, at the ability, the our control over mind, and the ability of our mind to basically focus on a certain part gets stronger. And that helps over time as the overthinking decreases, because we are in more control of our mind and senses. All right, now one more topic connected to this is the flow state, which you must have heard of. The state in which we go when we are really into, like, if we really into, like, work, do something. Suppose we really like to do the work we are doing right now, then a lot of time we just go into that work in such a way that we do not are not aware of anything else but the work, not even ourselves. Suppose you are hungry, or suppose I'll give my example. So I do a lot of coding, right? So there have been many times when I've been coding for like continuously 7 to 8 hours. And after my coding part is complete, after my project is complete, when I stopped, after that I realized that I am extremely hungry, I am thirsty, and I'm really feeling very tired. But in those 5 to 7 hours, I didn't felt anything, because I was in a flow state. That's what flow state does. It basically takes your whole cognition and focuses in it on the one task. So you are not even aware of yourself, that what you are doing, what you are feeling, not nothing. You are just working, and that work is getting done, that's it. So that's what flow state is, and it's very interesting phenomenon. Now the next thing is consciousness. Now this is not the image is not the typical structure of consciousness. I just put it because it makes sense a little bit. Consciousness is yet a really debatable, not debatable, but a really open place where a lot of research has been going on, both in, like, in philosophy and in neuroscience, in psychology, everywhere. So And consciousness basically means the awareness that we have of our internal and external world. Okay, so basically what it means is that there is someone who is actually getting is aware of all of these things. For example, if you are reading a book with a lot of focus, and in the background there is a dog on the street that's barking, you might not hear that dog because your consciousness is actually focused on reading the book. But if someone tells you that, hey dad, there's a dog barking there, then you might listen to it suddenly. But it always existed, the sound of the dog barking always existed, but you didn't hear it. So consciousness is something that is very debatable or very active topic right now. We don't really have a clear idea of it. Some researchers say that that matter came first and it basically gave rise to consciousness later. But many others are those who say that consciousness is completely different, and we have not really known how it works basically. So it is called Chit in Sanskrit, and if you actually explore the older Vedic literature, there's quite some interesting explanations or observations about consciousness. So I'll share one of those. Basically, consciousness is called as Chit in Sanskrit. And if you go into the Upanishads part, which is all about self, about yourself, and about the scientific inquiry of who you are. So their consciousness basically is inquired in a way that, suppose you are right now awake, right? And you know that you are in this lecture, you are listening to me and all of that, and you are aware of the world around. Now suppose you go to sleep. All right, now suddenly this world doesn't exist and you go inside the sleep and you dream. So suddenly a dream world is created, but that is also not a real world. That's a world that's created by your mind, and you are inside that world. Okay, now suppose you do not wake up and you are just inside the brain, inside the dream world. Now what will happen if so you might consider that the dream world is very real because till the point that you do not wake up. Once you wake up, then you know, okay, that was a dream, so that's not real, this is real, because now we have something to compare, right? But your consciousness was there inside of the dream also, and it is also there in the deep sleep when you do not dream at all. Because you might not experience time there, but the thing is, suppose you go to sleep and you dream things, but there's also that part of blankness, that fully darkness in your sleep, where you do not experience anything, but you know that you experience darkness and nothing, and you didn't experience time. So there's a little bit of consciousness there too. And that's how so that's the logic that is applied in the Upanishads. And many of the scientists actually also look to the Upanishads for the understanding of consciousness, because it's not something that our instruments can detect. Of course we can know that which part gets activated when we do certain things and all of that, but consciousness is not parts. It's really about being aware of everything. So this is a topic of deep research if you want to go into it, and I'll just give an overall understanding of what consciousness is, and a lot of research has been going on it right now. Now the next part is memory. So memory has three parts basically: cognitive memory, sensory, short term, and long term. Now, what sensory memory means is the memory that our senses have of touch, basically touch, smell, taste, sound. That memory is stored in the sensor just for 3 to 5 seconds, and it's then deleted. Then the short-term memory is the memory that basically when we try to remember a phone number, we keep repeating that number in our mind, right? We forgot it if like we get forgot it. Yeah, we forgot it around 20 to 30 seconds. We forgot it. So that short-term memory. And the in short-term memory, if you forgot the thing, then there are two cases: either you remembered it in the long time, it's passed on here, or you just forgot it, it's deleted. So now let's see the long-term memory. In this there are two types: explicit and implicit. Explicit basically means the conscious memory, and implicit means the unconscious memory. Now, conscious memory means the things that we remember doing consciously. Consciously, that means the events we experience. Okay, you might have gone to a certain birthday party or something, and you remember that later, right? So that is the explicit long term memory. Okay. The second type is the knowledge and concepts. uh, we are studying psychology right now, okay, so we remember the concepts that we have studied before this or in the previous educational background of ours. So that's the part of knowledge and concepts of, conscious memory. Unconscious memory is basically skills and actions. That means suppose we are learning to play an instrument, musical instrument. Initially we might have a very tough time, trying to fit the fingers properly and use the instrument or play the instrument smoothly. But as we try to keep doing that over and over and over again, our muscle memory builds up, and there comes a point when we no longer need to focus on how our fingers are moving. Okay, we can just play it, and we might sing along with playing that instrument. So that's how unconscious memory works. Okay, the memory gets stored over time, and after a while you just have it, like you play the instrument and the memory is ready to know to tell your fingers where to go, where to play, all of that. Now emotional conditioning, let's take an example to understand this. Okay, so suppose there's a child, okay, there's a small child, 1 or 2 years old, and that child is standing near a swimming pool, very very close to a swimming pool. And that child's mother or father just comes rushing and saying that, oh my god, my child will fall down. And that child is noticing all of this, okay, and just picks up the child with a horrified expression. And this happens many times. This keeps happening, as the child grows up, and then later the child has this low-key fear of swimming. So what happens there is that the child the child basically, when he was small, saw the emotions that he captured the emotions of his parents, of when he was near a body of water, like pool. That got stored into his subconscious, and then later when he grew up, those subconscious fears keep playing. It happens with all of us. We have all different kinds of fears. They work basically on emotional conditioning. Fears and also good parts also work on that. So emotional conditioning basically, when you have certain things stored in your mind because of a strong emotion that's holding in the memory. Okay, so it might not be conscious, you might not know why it is there, but it's there, and you can deal with it, of course, in different ways. But that's an example of emotional conditioning. Now let's take an example of how basic memory works. So we have our five senses. Okay, the five senses take the input from the external world that is passed on to the short-term memory according to our attention. This is important. Okay, suppose we are watching a movie, then our attention is on the movie, like the movie and the sound. Then then the memory that will be passed on to the short-term memory will be more strongly about of eyes, of sight, and of hearing. Others will not really reach our short-term memory because we are not focusing on it. Our attention is not on those. Okay, so once it reaches short-term memory, it is there for a very small amount of time, and later and after that it is decided on how the memory will be, will the memory be stored or will it be deleted. If it is stored, then it goes to a long term memory. And long term memory is like it can store lifetime, so the memory of our whole lifetime. So that's the long term memory. And one thing about memory, long term and short term, is that suppose you try to remember an event from your childhood, and you may remember it in a certain way, and the same incident, suppose your mother was also there and she tries to remember it, she remembers it in a certain different way, like the situation was not like this, it was like this. So why does this happen? Is because the memory that we call from, like the long term memory that we try to remember, it is not fact based. Okay, it basically works in this way. If you try to remember an incident, that incident will come from the long term memory, it will come to a short term memory, it will be upgraded. Okay, there will be certain changes made to that memory, and then it will be again sent back to the long term memory after with an update. So what happens is that we rarely remember the incidents as they happened, but we remember them in a modified way. So that's why we cannot really depend on our memory for trivial things, because it can be tricky, it can get tricky. And an example of this is that uh, a couple with their child was studied for over a year by researchers. What they did is basically they put cameras inside their house, and all of the things they did was basically being recorded with consent, of course. So what happened is that after a year, they basically asked the parents about a certain incidents that had happened in their kitchen. and both the parents gave different opinions. Like the father said no, it was a daytime, the mother said no, it was nighttime, and all of that. So this was an example of how even research tells that our long-term memory is not really worth relying on. It changes over time because it is updated and then put back here. Okay, now the next topic is knowledge, representation of knowledge. Now, knowledge is basically things that we can hold in mind. Okay, so not the things that our senses give to us. What does that mean? Basically, suppose you are trying to remember a formula. That formula is in your mind. Okay, just a second. Okay, so or you are try to imagine a certain image or certain you are trying to draw something, so you are trying to imagine something. Those things are all in your mind. Okay, so you cannot really tell if they are if they are coming from your senses. They are not. So there are two types in this: declarative and procedural. Declarative knowledge is basically facts. Like suppose when did India got independence? That's a fact. And then how what is the distance between moon and earth? That's a fact. All this is knowledge. You cannot see the distance between between earth and moon in numbers, but you do remember it in numbers, right? So that's declarative knowledge stored in our memory. And procedural knowledge is basically the knowledge of procedures. Suppose you are cooking, you know how to cook, right? You know, basically take the veggies, wash them, cut them, then boil them if needed, and all of that. So that is the memory or knowledge of procedure. And this is yeah, these are two types, uh, and these are the basic way we can represent knowledge in the brain. Of course, we can go dive deep into it, but not right now. It's just as it's just in the introductory session. Now the next thing is imagery. Now this can be done with an exercise. So I just want you to do a certain activity. Okay, so you don't need to do anything. You just need to sit there and imagine what I'm telling you to imagine. Okay, just imagine it. No issue. Like it's a short paragraph. You just have to imagine what I'm saying. You will know what imagery is. It's the best example. So imagine that you are standing on a beach all alone. It is the time of dusk, and the sky is painted with the colors of orange, purple, blue, and white. The sound of the waves splashing at the shore is giving the perfect background music for the colorful drama playing out in the heavens. Okay. Now, those who did imagine that, try to imagine that. That's what imagery is, the mental pictures or mental stories that we form. That comes under imagery, and I think this is pretty clear of an example to understand. And yeah, now language. Now language is basically symbols that we make sense of, as I told before, and language is also the most effective long-term memory that that we know, because we learn language right from the childhood, and we use those principles all our life. So that's the long-term memory that we maybe arguably access the most. All right, so now I have certain examples here. This is basically the first image on the left. That's the image of ancient Sanskrit language, and you and me might not understand it. We might understand certain symbols, that this is a snake, this is a maybe parrot or some bird, this is a bee, but this is an actual language used to communicate in this way. All right, and this is the language of ancient Greece. Again, we cannot read it, cannot understand it. And this is ancient or Vedic Sanskrit. So this might be recognizable to some, at least the words, because we know Hindi, and maybe but still we may not know the meaning of it. So language is basically our brain trying to understand symbols and making sense of it, and then using those symbols to communicate with a set of people around us. So that's a complex process. All right, we may not think too much about language, but it's a very complex process, and our brain is learning that from childhood, and constantly recalling it, and then putting it artistically also for those who write here. And it's also said that we learn best in our native language, because our native language is very closely connected to our emotions. So if we and one fact about memory is that if you want to remember certain things, and then make sure that you have certain emotions attached to it. Like for example, if you are interested in a certain topic, like for example you are interested in astrophysics, and you study something about astrophysics, and there's another topic that you're not at all interested in. Suppose let's take an example of maybe okay, plantation. You are not interested in plantation, but you are made to read the knowledge about plantation. In this case, as you like astrophysics, and as your emotions toward astrophysics are very much attached to it, then you will learn and retain that information longer and in a very efficient way, because wherever our emotions are connected to the knowledge that we are trying to understand, there are very high chances that we'll understand that knowledge very nicely and remember it over a long period of time. On the other hand, if we dislike something and we try to study that, we cannot really do that nicely, and we must have all experienced this at some point in our life. So yeah, if you want to learn something really deeply, then try to learn it in your native language. That will help a lot. The next part is developmental psychology. This part basically just focuses or try to understand how do people grow throughout their life, or how does two people who have grown up in the same environment, siblings possibly, differ so much when they grow up. And also the concept of nature and nurture comes here, which we'll study later on. So developmental psychology basically sees the whole process of how the psychology of a child works, how it basically develops, then how it works during the teenage when the uh, hormonals are very high in the person's body. What's the psychological changes then, and then how does it change over time when it reaches adulthood, maturity, and all of that. So this part is actually quite interesting, and I'll talk about it more in the next nurture versus nature part, which will come in a few slides. Next part is thinking and conception. Now, thinking is something that we do by default. Okay, we cannot really form any kind of concepts without thinking. If you learn a new maths formula, understand a new maths formula, you will have to think before you understand it. Or for example, if you see an apple, that's a thought that it comes to your mind that is an apple. If you never saw a fruit like apple before, you might not recognize it. Thoughts basically work in that way that even if you don't consciously call them, thoughts happen, and then the thinking process happens and concept formation happens. This is a little deep topic, so I'm just giving an overview here. We'll have the details in the next sections of the subject. Now, the next thing is human and artificial intelligence and how they are those two relate. So, as I said initially, that I'll give an example of algorithm, how it works on the neural pattern of our brain. Okay, so this is a neural net. Now, not going to go into detail. Don't worry, just explain the concept here. So, let's understand how human brain works. So, suppose you see an apple, and that seeing an apple may remind you of so many things, right? That basically sets up a chain reaction. You see an apple, you think of the color red, you think of the shape of the apple. Some of you might also think about Newton. Then if you don't like apple, you might also think that, oh, I don't like that fruit, and all of that. There are too many chain reactions that happen inside your brain before, like without even you knowing. So that's how human brain works, that's how neurons work. And this neural net, basically, as the name suggests, it is based on that structure. What happens is that you basically give an input to this algorithm, and there's a certain way it is developed. And so basically what happens is that you give an input, then the input passes on to the steps of the algorithm and the way it is designed, and you get an output. Like for example, let's take a chatbot that we chat on websites, that helper bot that is there. So suppose you ask the chatbot, hi, how are you? Okay, so that will be the input for this neural net. Then the neural net will go on and search all its data, all its training, and try to understand what kind of reply should, first of all, what kind of message is this, and then what kind of reply should be generated. Then once that neural net figures out what kind of reply is appropriate for this question, then the output will come, and you will receive that I am good, how are you? That's how these algorithms are developed on the concepts of the human mind, and that's where these both different worlds meet. All right. Now study the last section, which is the issues in study of cognitive psychology. Like every other field, there are also certain issues that we face here, or rather certain choices that we have to make while studying these things. So first is nature versus nurture. What this means is basically there are two concepts in studying in researching things. First is nature. That means everything that a child learns is only based on the genes and hereditary factors from the child's parent and nothing else. All right, that's what shapes the child's future and the personality. Now the next part, the other side of this is that nurture. That means that as the child grows, the environmental variable of the child, basically the environment the child is living in, that plays an important factor in shaping the child's personality. Now these two things are very different, and we have the issue here that we have to decide which one to take, which path to take. Now we have proof for both of them. We know both of these things. We know that DNA gives us a lot of hereditary things, but we also have now know that the environmental factors play an important role. For example, uh, when a child till a child is about the age of 6 to 7, we know that the child subconscious is basically taking it all the data, all the basically environmental factors. Uh, so we can say that the child is not actually learning by what the parents are trying to teach the child, but the child is learning by observing what the parents are doing. So it's always better to set an example rather than teach lessons when you grow a child, according to that part of science. So that's why you will see that the child actually observe or actually becomes a lot like the circumstances around the child when he was a child, when he was small, because the child that time didn't really had the rationale to to distinguish between what is right, what is wrong. So all the data that was coming through the senses is stored in the brain, in the child's subconscious, and that data then later plays its role when the child starts to develop the personality and character, and a lot of things are came from that part, and not the child, neither the parents know that it came from the childhood. Okay, so that's what the part of nurture tells us. And nature does not, the part of nature doesn't tell anything. It assumes that only the genes and hereditary factors play a role. The environmental factors have no impact whatsoever. Okay, now next is rationalism versus empirism. Again, weird technical terms, but it is an easy concept. Okay, so, for example, rationalism. Okay, so rationalism is basically rationalizing thing, and like with thought, with intellect, by using the mind. And empirism basically means that the field of knowledge that is developed or dependent only on sensory input. What this means is that a rationalist or a person who is a rationalist, that will say that okay, I can make sense of the knowledge, I can make sense of the world, I can gain knowledge just by thinking and intuition and in my intellect. On the other hand, an empiricism person will say that no, thinking and intuition and intellect, that's not what gives us knowledge. What you get is the knowledge you get is only from your senses. That's the essential difference between these two things, these two thought schools basically. And again, rationalists believe in intuition, empirics do not. And rationalism claims the individuals have innate knowledge of concepts, and so rationalism thinks that we have innate knowledge through our genes and all of that. But empirism refuses that. It says that no, a person when born is basically a clean slate, and whatever the person learns ahead in life, that's all through experience, through sensory experiences. The mind or the intellect or the mind, the intuition, there's no knowledge in that. We have no hereditary knowledge. That's what this field tells us. Now, for example, suppose you see a person slapping, okay, a person slapping someone else. Now, if you are a rationalist person, this first part, if you believe in rationalism, or if you follow the rationalist school of thought, then you will say that oh, that must hurt because you saw, your eyes saw the basically the force with which the hand landed on the cheek of that person. So by logic, you know that that must hurt, and that person may have shouted. So that's rationalism, that you think and okay, that must have hurt. That's the rationalist way of drawing conclusion. And if the empiricist is there now, what he'll do is that he won't say that, oh my, he won't draw the conclusion that it hurts. He himself go there, stand in the front of the person and tell him that slap me, and after he gets slapped only then he'll say, oh okay, this hurts. So that's the essential difference between these two things, that one is purely based on senses, and other is based on mind, intellect and intuition. Now next is structure versus processes. So the difference between these two is that structure basically means trying to analyze and understand the structures of the mind, that what part leads to what, which part is connected to which part, and damage to which part leads to what consequences, etc. What processes means is that trying to understand the process of how things happen inside the brain. So how the messages are carried, or how thoughts are generated, and how emotions are triggered, how external situations trigger emotions. Those things are come in the processes part. So this is also a the thing to do, that's that's always to be decided, that which should we focus on more, structure or processes. We do not know that exactly, so that's also an issue in psychology. Now this domain generality and domain specificity. Domain means all the domains that we see, that we saw before, like the consciousness, perception, etc. Now suppose I do a research in the domain of perception, okay, and the conclusion or the result of that research, I may say that the research is only suitable for the concept of perception, or I may say that the research that the research, that the conclusion is same across all the domains. So what should we do? Maybe the the research conclusion is not really applicable to all the domain, but that's what the issue is. We have to decide that should we follow domain generality, that only take one domain and try to figure out things in that, or we should take certain things and just generalize the conclusion to all of the domains. Now the next is validity of causal inferences versus ecological. Now let's understand this. First of all, let's understand the causal inferences. So causal inferences basically means the researches that are done in a lab, or in a in a research environment where the researcher has control over the variables and over the situation, etc. So what the causal inferences in this first section, the thing is that we might get very accurate conclusions. We might be able to draw conclusions very nicely, because we can control the environment, we can control the research procedure, the variables, etc. But that study's outcome may not be applicable to the normal world out there, because in the normal world there are a lot of variables, and a lot of things can go wrong or go differently. So yeah, it's accurate in a way. Casual inferences are accurate, but they are not applicable to the generalized public or generalized situations. And in ecological validity, validity is basically trying to understand people in the way they are, or minds in the way they are, like understanding people in normal environment, not putting them into laboratory into lab settings, just observing people or trying to conduct studies on normal behavior, or normal behavior of people when they are in the world out there. So this kind of study may be tough, may be a little bit tough to conduct, but it might be more generalized, can be more generalized and helpful, because it is actually trying to find research conclusions in the real world out there, and not inside a lab. So the next one is applied and the basic research. Now applied research is basically anything applied, is basically applied word means that something that we are doing for a specific purpose, okay. So applied research means the research that we do to get a specific or to solve a specific problem. And basic research is a generalized research. Now let's take an example. Now suppose a company wants to know that are the employees more productive when they basically get breaks in between their whole day of work, or are they more productive if they are just in the zone, or in the zone and working throughout the day. So this get the answer for this, applied research will be used, because it is trying to find a specific solution to a specific problem, okay. And now basic research basically means, suppose I want to research that research the effect of early childhood environment on making someone more prone to anxiety in the older age, in the yeah, when they grow up. So that's the basic research, because if I conduct this research and get the output, then the research conclusion will help everyone, because it's a general research. Okay, it's a research about about the childhood environment of someone and its effect on after growing up. So that will be helpful for the general public, but applied research is not like that. And applied research, of course, is good for the people who want to solve their own problems, solve certain problems, but it's not really helpful for the general public. So that's the difference between these two. And again, we have the issue of selection, which should we conduct. Now the last part is biology research and behavioral research. And now difference in these two is that in the biological research, the researchers assume that the human behavior is fixed with what they got from the DNA and the chemistry inside their body, and that's not and nothing else influences their behavior. And in behavioral research, it is considered that the surroundings influence the individual growing up, and the DNA and chemicals are not really the only factors that play a role in the behavior. So again, we have to select here that which one is the best option. If we select biology, then we may miss out the variables of like environmental influence. If we select behavioral research, then we might undermine the impact of DNA and chemicals. So that's how we are again have the issue here. And that was all. That's all. The session is ended.